Yesterday we were talking about the halacha of an oven, and here's a picture just in front of you. It's a vast structure, and with a fire burning in the middle and perhaps a pot on top of it. And we learned that we're not going to put a pot on top of it or perhaps even next to it to keep warm on Shabbat. As we jump into the third Mishnah of the chapter, actually the third Mishnah of the third chapter, the third of the third, we're going to look at a similar sort of situation. We're not going to place an egg at the side of a boiler. So this is not an oven, this is a boiler, but it's a hot heat source. Titgalgel is to form a roundness, literally. And most people translate it as lightly cooked. Velo ifkaena besudarin. And we're not going to break it into a cloth, although Rabbi Yossi permits. And we're not going to cover it in hot sand or in road dust for it to be roasted. So we're using different derivatives. We're not cooking directly on Shabbat, but we're using different derivatives of heat sources to just cook a little bit on Shabbat. And this question of breaking the egg into a cloth, why we're not going to do that is not at all obvious. And I wanted to bring you the Bartanura, who is himself quoting the Talmud. And he says, breaking it into a cloth, Lo yishberena al sudar shechumam b'chama. He shouldn't crack it on wrapping that was warmed by the sun, in order that it should be roasted by it. For we decreed that toldot chama, derivatives of the sun, are like derivatives of heat. The question in this Mishnah seems to be, and the same, by the way, applies to hot sand or road dust. The question seems to be, okay, we know that we're not going to cook directly on Shabbat. We're not going to cook indirectly by putting an egg next to a hot thing like a water boiler. What if we cooked using the energy from the sun rather than the energy from a fire? Can we do that? And Rabbi Yossi seems to permit it, by the way. Rabbi Yossi seems to permit using the energy from the sun to cook, but we don't follow Rabbi Yossi. We don't cook using solar energy on Shabbat. The Mishnah is going to continue with we're segueing now into different other kinds of energy. And the people of Tiberias once started to pipe cold water through the hot springs. There are hot springs in Tiberias. So they're not using solar energy, they're using ground energy to heat up their water. They brought a pipe of cold water through a branch of the hot springs. The sages said to them, if you do this on Shabbat, the sages said, look, don't think you can do this. Just like we're not going to cook with sun energy, we're not going to cook with ground energy either. If it happened on Shabbat, it's like hot water heated on Shabbat. You can't wash with it, you can't drink with it. Classic halacha that we know for hot water on Shabbat. B'Yom Tov, if it's on a festival, it's like water heated on a festival. Asurim b'rechitza. It's forbidden for washing, but permitted for drinking. The difference between a festival and a Shabbat is that on festival, we can cook. So we can heat stuff up on a festival for cooking. What about another kind of indirect heat? This is a mulyar hagaruf. This is a mulyar which has been raked out from its ashes. Shotin hemenu b'Shabbat. We do drink from it on Shabbat. But an antiki seems to be different. Antiki, af al pi shegrufa ein shotim mimenu. An antiki is something we don't drink from. Now, What is the difference? I mean, we don't really know what a mulyar is or an antiki. None of this seems to make much sense, actually. And I could not find you a picture of them, but they are described in the Gemara and the commentators. And the Gemara asks, we're in the Bavli now in Shabbat. What is a mulyar? It's Tana, mayim bifnim v'gecholim mibachutz. Water's on the inside and coals on the outside. It seems to be some kind of hot water heater that you load up with. It's basically it's a double skin. So in the middle skin, you've got your water, and then the outer skin is holding some coals, and you light your fire in the coals on the outer skin, and you heat up your water. And then remember, the Mishnah talked about it being cleared of its ashes. So we've cleared it of ashes before Shabbat, and we put it to one side, and we're going to drink from it on Shabbat. It's a bit like an urn that's been turned off. We're going to drink from it on Shabbat. What about the antiki? The Mishnah says we're not going to drink from the antiki. And the Gemara says, look, an antiki, even if it's swept and covered with ashes, one can't drink for it because its copper heats it. And the antiki, I brought you Jastro on the source sheet. Jastro says an antiki, well, it might mean a vessel suspended between fireplaces, but the Gemara focuses actually on his second definition, a metal vessel suspended within a cauldron-like vessel. It seems to be the same kind of structure that we've discussed before with the mulyar. It's a cauldron that's held in some kind of metal furnace, and the space underneath is filled with coals. And Rav Nachman teaches that we don't drink from it because its copper seems to retain heat so well that we feel as if we're still cooking on Shabbat. Something like that. It's not quite clear, but there is a concept of, if you like, we're cooking on Shabbat because it's just directly related to the fire. And this is the subject of the final Mishnah, which we're going to look at today. A kettle which was basically emptied. So we've taken this kettle off the stove. We've taken it off before Shabbat, by the way. The question is, well, the Mishnah says, Lo liten l'tochotzon en bishvil sheyeh chama. So you've got this hot kettle that you've taken off the stove. We're not going to pour cold water in it to heat up the water. Aval noten hu l'tocho l'toch or l'toch hakos kadei lahafshiran. We're not going to pour cold water in to heat up the cold water, but we could pour into it in order to cool it down. You can cool down hot liquid by pouring in cold water. You can't heat up water. And similarly, we're not going to put spices into a pan or a pot that was just taken off the stove. This would have, we talk about a kli rishon. This would have the status of a kli rishon, a vessel that has just been used for cooking, that has been taken directly off the stove. We're not going to put spices into it because we're going to be cooking the spices. But aval notenu l'tocha kara or l'tocha tamchui. We could put it into a dish, or a tamchui is a vast casserole, actually. It's a vast, bit like a soup kitchen kind of thing. It's a vast casserole. And the assumption is that this is, if you like, is a second derivative of the fire. It's a dish that's just holding hot food, and we can stir spices in here because it's got the status of a kli sheni rather than a kli shlishi. And Rabbi Yehuda closes by saying, actually, you can put spice into anything except something that contains vinegar or brine. He has an idea that vinegar or brine heats and cooks. And chemically, he's right. Vinegar or brine does have a chemical effect similar to cooking, but practically speaking, the halacha, as in all of these Mishnayot, the halacha does not follow Rabbi Yehuda.